Hello and welcome back to another video. As promised in the last video, today we take a look at 10 obscure aircraft for the Americans that desperately need to be introduced into War Thunder. Why 10? Well, because I probably could make 20, because there are so many that I would love to see in the game, but let's just try to limit it to 10. I chose 10, in my opinion, very interesting aircraft that would certainly make quite an impact in the game, at least in my opinion. So let's start with the first one. At number 10 we have the consolidated B32 Dominator. This is a heavy bomber that stems from the same 1940s specification that the B29 originated from. In fact, it actually lost out to the B29 initially, but was then ordered by the Air Ministry as a backup design should the B29 prove to be a failure. However, ultimately it would be the B32 that ran into more trouble than the B29. It shared some features with the earlier B24, like the high-mounted Davis wing, which gave the aircraft high speed and lift capabilities, as well as excellent landing qualities. Initially, a B24 Type H tail was fitted. However, this gave the aircraft serious stability problems. And then a tail from a B29 was fitted, which still didn't solve the problem, and then Consolidated designed a new tail and came up with this absolute unit of a tail. This is one of the most distinguishing features of the B32. It would be powered by the same Wright R3350 engines that the B29 would be powered with the inner ones of these having the ability to set their propellers in a way to give the aircraft reverse thrust, which shortened the distance it took to land the aircraft and enabled it to taxi on the ground backwards as well. Its first flight took place on the 7th of September 1942, and it would subsequently encounter constant problems with oil leaks, the armament which was at first to be remotely controlled, and most significantly the pressurized cabin. Since the aircraft was actually intended to be flown at high altitude, like the B-29, but ultimately the pressurized cabin was altogether deleted, and the B-32s would operate at lower to medium altitudes. By the time the B-32 was issued for mass production, however, the B-29 was already in operation. Nevertheless, the B-32 saw service in the Pacific area. Starting from May 1945, they flew a small number of bombing and reconnaissance missions. These proved actually rather successful. It's best known for taking part in the last dogfight that resulted in American airmen being killed. This actually occurred after the war, when two B-32s conducted reconnaissance operations over Tokyo and were then attacked by a number of Mitsubishi Zeros and N1Ks, during which one American airman was sadly killed, making him the last casualty of World War II. After the war, production contracts were cancelled. 118 B-32s would ultimately be built, some of them going directly to the scrapyard actually, which is kind of a sad thought. Sadly, none of these aircraft survive today. The top speed of the B-32 was 575 km per hour, which makes it quite a fast heavy bomber. It has 10 50 caliber machine guns, so it boasts some seriously impressive armament and can carry 9.1 tons of bombs. This will make the B-32 a great alternative, not an alternative, but a great premium for the Americans. I can see this aircraft at a battle rating of 6.0 or 6.3 and being the American counter to the Ju-288 spam that we currently have in game. So yeah, I am actually, despite me not flying bombers all too much, quite interested to see this aircraft in the game. At number 9 we come to the McDonald XP67. This is a super lightweight fighter, not too dissimilar from the SAI 403 Dardo that we spoke in my first video for the Italians. It follows actually the same basic principles to be a super lightweight fighter built from non-strategic materials, specifically wood. It was intended to be easy to build and operate, and stems from a 1941 specification called Tri-4, which stands for 400 horsepower, 4,000 pound max weight, and the speed of 400 miles per hour, which was rather optimistic. The engine chosen was a Ranger 15770-9, which was a supercharged engine, but the XP67 prototypes would only receive the -7 engine, which did not have a supercharger. This engine delivered 500 horsepower. The aircraft was fitted like the P-39 with a tricycle landing gear, which offered good handling on the ground and in itself good visibility. However, the cockpit was mounted so far back and so deep in the fuselage that the aircraft would suffer from terrible visibility not only on the ground but even in the air as well. More significantly, Bell had absolutely no experience with wood, and so they outsourced the manufacture of some of the parts to subcontractors, some of which built furniture. The first flight of the aircraft took place in April of 1944, and the aircraft proved itself to be a total joke, so that date is rather fitting. The aircraft was at first projected to weigh only 1,680 kilograms. However, the Air Ministry insistence on the aircraft being also able to fit a small bomb load led to modifications, and this would make the aircraft more heavy at 1.8 tons. It suffered from terrible visibility and proved to be woefully underpowered. Not only that, but it was also not that easy to fly and encountered heavy vibrations, which was because of the engine was directly bolted to the airframe. This was then solved by applying rubber buffers, but still the speed remained abysmal with only 530 km per hour, which is a far cry from the 400 miles per hour that were originally specified. The wing loading was rather high, with 196 kg per square meter, so the aircraft would have likely not even been that great of a turner. With 18 meter per second climb rate, the climb rate was actually not too bad. However, the engine being non-supercharged would have been pretty bad at altitude. Because of the constant delays with manufacture and performance problems, and the Americans basically realizing that they wouldn't need a fighter like that because it did not have a shortage of materials, the project was cancelled in December of 1944. 2 aircraft would ultimately be built. One of them apparently is still around in Dayton, Ohio. Now, with all that, this aircraft sounds like like a complete joke, and to be honest, it is. But I don't know, I just like the looks of it. It looks like an SII 403, just a little bit fatter. So it kind of fits the American theme right there. I'm sorry, I just had to make that joke. Please forgive me. But yeah, I don't know, I just like the look of this thing. It looks so weird. It looks cute. I could see this thing being like the American counterpart to the Caudron C714. Utter garbage. But still, you just have to like it somehow. So this would be a very low tier aircraft, maybe 1013. Armament was intended to be actually 120mm cannon and 250 caliber machine gun, so the armament would actually be rather good for that kind of BR. But still, I would say at 1.3, 1.7 max, this thing would feel quite at home. At number 8 we come to the McDonald XP67 Moonbat. Now this is a prototype heavy fighter with quite a unique layout. The specs stem from 1940 and call for a fast, long-range bomber destroyer. Actually a number of aircraft companies made designs for this competition, and McDonald was only one of them. The final design of the Moonbat, it was reworked actually 2 times before being accepted, were finished in 1941 and called for a highly sophisticated and aerodynamically clean aircraft. The aircraft had a so-called all-airfoil design. It was very flat and every edge possible was blended into the wing or the fuselage to give as much lift and airflow as possible, and this makes the Moonbat quite a futuristic and absolutely beautiful looking design if you ask me. The entire aircraft was geared towards performance. However, that would all come crashing down when the engine was to be specified to be the Continental 1430 Hyper engine. This was an engine that was supposed to be to power a number of different aircraft, and this engine would sadly never live up to its expectations. It really was the engine that killed the aircraft in this case, and we will see it in another one as well. It was supercharged, turbo supercharged actually, but it proved woefully underpowered. It did not deliver its 1350 horsepower. In fact, it was supposed to deliver 1600 horsepower at full water emergency power. During test flights, it barely made over 1000. This, coupled with the high weight of the moonbat, which was around 9 tons, made the aircraft sluggish to accelerate and gave it a not that good climb rate. McDonald actually made pleas to re-engine the aircraft with Allison or Rolls-Royce engines, but he was rejected because of budget constraints. The aircraft by that point had already been rather expensive. The engines plagued the aircraft continuously with overheating problems and the loosening of bearings, and actually caused several of the test flights or ground tests to be abandoned because the engines were overheating or were out giving out. This led to the first flight actually taking place in January of 1944. During that time, the aircraft would be continuously improved, but the engines remained the main issue. The engines really were bad. I mean, the aircraft retained a top speed of 652 km per hour, which is actually pretty impressive given that the engines were just that bad. Unfortunately, the prototype would be destroyed in 1944, and subsequently the aircraft was cancelled. Even a mixed-powered variant with a jet engine to augment the Continental engines was rejected, and the entire project was shelved in late 1944. Only a single prototype would be built. Armament, there are several proposed armaments for this aircraft, including 650 cals and 420s. Then there is one with I think 250 cals and a massive 75mm gun. But the final proposal apparently was for the aircraft to be fitted with 637mm M4 cannon, which gives the aircraft quite an impressive armament. Now, where this aircraft sits in would sit in the tech tree is a little bit difficult to ascertain, since it depends on whether Gaijin gives the engines its full power output or not. If they do, this would be actually quite a decent bomber destroyer at around 5.0 maybe, especially useful against Ju-288s or the like, and would be a rather fun aircraft to fly. I would love to see this thing in the game. It's one of the most beautiful aircraft ever designed, if you ask me. At number 7 we come to the YB-35. This is an ultra long range heavy bomber and one of the favorite projects of Jack Northrop, founder of the famous Northrop Aircraft Company. Now, Northrop and the Horton brothers are the two names that come into mind when it comes to designing all flying wing aircraft. And it's often said that the Horton 9 directly influenced the modern B2 Spirit. But to make a very complicated matter short, that's not really the case. A lot of the B2 Spirit's development can be traced actually back to the XB or YB-35, which you see in the pictures here. And this again called for an ultra long range heavy bomber that would be able to attack Germany from the United States should Britain fall. The development contract was allocated in 1941, and it would actually be similar to the German America bomber project. The Germans had basically had the same idea to bomb America if necessary in a one-way trip, either making it back to Germany or landing in Japan, for which there were some different and very exciting aircraft designs proposed. But the YB-35 certainly was one of the most interesting aircraft of its time. There were actually models built to test the feasibility, miniature all-flying wings called the N9Ms. Two XB35 would be built first, making their first flight on the 25th of June 1946, so way after the war. It was a promising aircraft, but it encountered severe problems with its contra-rotating propellers. The design was radically new, and it required constant tweaking, overworking the ideas, and it basically wound up in development hell. The contract for the pre-production YB35 was actually ordered as early as 1943, but the pre-production model only made its first flight in 1948, so 3 years after World War II ended. The main problem were the engines. By the way, these were the Wasp Major engines, which were some of the most powerful piston engines ever built. But the major problems were the propellers, since they were not really geared for the engines at first. There were constant delays and problems, also with stability, and just in general the advanced design. It caused a lot of problems initially. Not that they couldn't have been solved, but the project by this time was already well over budget over time, and the propellers of the aircraft were already thought as obsolete in a time where it was pretty absent that jet aircraft would be the predominant aircraft in the skies, which is why two of the YB35s were retooled to jet propulsion, giving rise to the YB49, of which two were built, plus one with 6 engines, which was called YRB49A, if I remember correctly. This, of course, significantly raised performance, but with especially these early jet engines having not the best efficiency, this resulted in the range dropping significantly, and this was deemed not acceptable, as well as the numerous issues the aircraft had, and that had to be ironed out, and of course the entire project becoming way over budget and delayed. This led eventually to the YB35s and YB49s project cancellation, with the rival B36 entering production. Of course, the B36 is another aircraft that could well be added into this game as well, but I chose the YB35 because it's just such an interesting aircraft, such a cool looking thing. I mean, I love the Horton 229 game. How cool would it be to see this thing in the sky? That said, it would be at a pretty high BR. Despite it being a propeller aircraft, it still has a speed of 630 km per hour. Intended armament would comprise 20-50 caliber machine guns and a 23.5 ton bomb load. So this would be at least at the battle rating of the B29, probably higher at 7.3 maybe. But certainly a cool sight in the skies of War Thunder. Yeah, I would really love to see the YB35 and the YB49 maybe as well in the game. I hope they do come at some point. And at number 6 we come to the XP40Q. The XP40Q were a trio of prototypes built to further improve upon the venerable P40, which was one of the backbone aircraft of the Americans in the early part of World War II, but quickly became superseded by more capable fighter aircraft. All of the XP40Qs were converted from serial airframes, 2 from K-series airframes and the last one from an N-series airframe. All of them had the more powerful 2-stage supercharged versions of the Allison V1710. The program was initiated in 1943, and the first aircraft, the XP40Q1, had an Allison 101 with 1500 horsepower at altitude. It received a new cooling system, 4-bladed propellers, and the radiators were moved under the fuselage. In this configuration, its first flight took place on the 13th of June 1943. However, pretty soon it was then revised, with the aircraft being modified with a cut-down rear fuselage and the subsequent bubble canopy being installed, as well as clipped wings and the installation of an Allison 121, rated at 1800 horsepower at altitude with water injection. The aircraft was then designated as the XP40Q2. The oil cooler and engine air intake were also moved to the old-fashioned position in the front of the aircraft, but much more narrower and with a much more elegant design. In this configuration, the aircraft was tested and managed 679 km per hour at full power, with an improved climb rate of 22 meters per second. Remember that the P40 particularly was known for its lack of climbing ability, 22 meters per second being quite a serious number. Next in line was the Q2A, which was almost identical to the Q2 with some minor cockpit modifications and stuff like that. Following this then came the Q3, which was converted from an N-series airframe. It again received an improved canopy, and in my opinion is the best looking of the bunch. Just look at that thing. Despite all of that, all the more powerful engines, and the test files revealing that the aircraft was fast, very maneuverable, and excellent to handle, the performance was still less than contemporary P51 and P47s, which resulted in the aircraft sadly being cancelled, with 2 of the aircraft being scrapped and 1, the Q2A, if memory serves me correct, being used actually as a race plane. I mean, I can't see why, it really looks rather slick, but unfortunately it crashed in 1947, meaning that none of the aircraft are around today. Now, the XP40Q is a choice that might wonder some of you why I put it on this list. It doesn't seem all too special, but I put it on this list for one simple reason. It has to be one of the absolutely most beautiful designs ever built. This is such a stunning looking machine. Just look at the sleek lines. I mean, people say the P51 looks good. Hell, this thing beats the P51 easily in the looks department. I mean, just, wow, really one of the most beautiful aircraft I've ever seen in my life, in my opinion. And I think with free build, this thing could actually be a very, very cool premium. All of the XP40Qs were armed with 450 caliber machine guns, so I could see it at a BR at the same as the, what's it called, that premium Mustang, the F6C. Is it called? The F6C, yes, the Battle Pass vehicle. That's in the French tech tree, if memory serves me correctly. Because this one also has 450 cals, and it should have similar performance to that. And it would offer a unique aircraft for the Americans as a premium in that department. Not to mention, the aircraft would be a fine transition from the regular P40 series for people who enjoy these fighters. I mean, the P40 is a capable aircraft. At its BR, it just suffers from a lack of speed, acceleration, and most importantly, climb rate. And the XP40Q basically improves up on all these aspects, and it would be a really, really good aircraft at around 3.7 to 4.0. Definitely one of my favorite aircraft that I would love to see in the game. Yeah, that does it for this first half of the video. I do want to make this a two-parter, since I don't want to stretch it too much. The video would then be almost an hour long, and I think at this rate this should be enough. So I will see you when we cover the top 5 in the next one.